Florida State lands a commitment from a safety down in South Florida this week. Karen Maycock, a three-star safety out of Miami Central High School. He's 6'1", 200 pounds. As a junior, Richie, he totaled 62 tackles, 17 of them for loss. He had 3 pass breakups, 8 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles in just 8 games there at Miami Central. And Florida State, well, let's talk about him for just a minute, but Florida State piling up a decent start to this class. And I know what people will say about recruiting. I understand that every time, like it doesn't matter until they sign. I get all that. But when something happens, we are still going to talk about it. So as much as the comments are going to be littered with, well, it doesn't matter until they sign, I understand that. Florida State's starting to put together a fairly good class for 26. And I mean, we know that that's what they need to do to eventually find success long-term, especially under Mike Norvell. But a good pickup, somebody that, you know, I know people will say, oh, just a 3-star. This is somebody that Miami was in on heavy, Florida, Alabama, big-time programs that do a really good job, and Pat Surtain went out and won a battle.
Yeah, and sometimes, with the ranking website's a little late to the party. These coaches are really good at evaluating that so they get where they're at. And sometimes you see a 5-star and you're like, is he really a 5-star? Sometimes you see a 3-star and you said, oh, that guy's got potential. So I really prefer looking at offer sheets and are these legitimate offers or not? And I think all of these offers were legitimate where they all would have taken his commitment today. Sometimes you have kids out there who have an offer, but if they tried to commit, the coach would say, well, just hold off a little bit, make sure you're making the right decision, kind of slow play him a little bit. That happens as well. But, I do think both Miami and Alabama would have taken his offer. One of the beat writers on the 247 Miami site actually loaded a crystal ball for him with a 6 out of 10 confidence. So Miami. So I think it's a good win, and getting back into South Florida, Miami Central is, I believe that's where Dalvin went. Like not a bad place to get some kids from. So I think it's a really strong pickup. But I do think he's someone that, and anyone who's followed recruiting long enough will know that when it comes to South Florida kids, especially, first commitment often is not their only commitment. So it will be a battle to signing day, but it's always good to be the team that they're committed to as opposed to trying to flip them. And, we're always going to do well with recruiting defensive backs, but it's still nice to beat out schools like Alabama and Miami for a kid like this.
All right, I'll get right back to the video, but first I want to give some love to our friends over at Russo & Co. I told you about Chris Russo and his business last week, and it is certainly tax season. Hopefully you've already gotten your 1099s or your W-2s. Listen, Chris is a huge Florida State fan, just like you and I are. He's been a CPA since 2002. He got his MBA in 2004. He's also got a law degree. He's got 25 plus years of experience doing this stuff. And if you need assistance with any tax preparation, any tax advisory, if you need help with preparing 1099s or W-2s for employees, if you own a business, give my guy Chris a call. His info is down in the description. You can also see it here on the screen. Again, Chris will do his very best to get you taken care of, to make sure that you're getting your maximum refund, that you keep as little in the IRS's hands as possible, but of course, doing everything legally and not getting you in trouble. Chris will hold your hand every step of the way. If you mention that you saw him his information here on Double Fries No Slaw, he'll give you a free consultation. Again, it's Russo & Co. Great guy, great Seminole, and hopefully if you are in need of any tax services, you will certainly reach out to him. We'll tell you more about him as the weeks and months go on, as we lead up to tax season, but again, appreciate Chris at Russo & Co. for their support. Yeah, I actually just saw another update from something that was a little bit more recent. It says he's actually 6'2", so pretty rangy, got good size. We're not going into a full, necessarily like breakdown, but yeah, that was my biggest takeaway too, was what you just said. Like the fact that they were able to, crystal balls, I feel like have evolved a little bit. And I used to like what Newberg did when he would, in like January, February, like project out, or it actually might even have been the summer, because kids seem to wrap up their commitments a lot earlier now. Like they kind of shut them down in the summer, or they commit after their visits, and you don't have as many commitments happening in the college football or the high school football season, which is the fall. And so I used to like what Newberg did when he would just project out a bunch of crystal balls. Like, here's my feeling in April, what's going to happen with this kid. And then you'd find out like how good he was at it in December. Whereas now I feel like the crystal ball has evolved a little bit into where it's,
Yeah.
hey, I just got intel. I think this kid's about to commit. Like that's what, there's nothing that drives me crazier than when you see a crystal ball or a prediction from On Three or something come in, and then the kid commits like 4 minutes later, and I'm like, all right, guys, did you need to up your accuracy that much? Like, did we need that 4 minute and not just at FSU, like everywhere? Did we need that 4 minute heads up of what was about to happen? But that seems like it's what that has divulged into, which is fine, right? Like, but for this to have been in, that crystal ball was placed late January, and here we are, late February, just a month later, and the kid commits to Florida State, and so Miami probably had some pretty good traction there, and to beat them out is a big deal. I mean, let's
Yeah.
call a spade a spade.
For a hometown kid.
Mario has out recruited Mike every year that Mike's been, that they've been there, right? Like, so any win you can get against them is really impressive, and it's a really good job. But what you said is absolutely correct, especially man, South Florida recruits that are skill position, right? Like skill position or DB or whatever, like a kind of a flashy position type. That one's not over until pen really does meet paper. And so everything we've bragged on, everything we've, kind of given them some credit for, buckle up because, we'll see what happens in December.
There will be some updates on him throughout the summer, I think for sure.
Yeah, taking an official visit to Florida State, to Miami, other places like I believe he's going to take his official visits, like which he very much should. But I do think that it's you'd rather play defense on on a kid than have to flip him away, which Florida State had some success late flipping some kids. I actually thought about it the other day, like an article came out with kind of the here's who's turning heads, and like 4 of them were Florida State flips, right? A flip from Auburn, a flip from Ole Miss, a flip from UCF, and a flip from UF as kind of some of the premier pieces of this class, which was a big deal. 2026 in general, Florida State has the number 11 class. Now it's incredibly early. They only have 7 commits. Everybody around them has a similar amount, but your top 10 is USC, Oregon, A&M, Penn State, Kansas has 12 commits. Their average is really low. I'd expect them to drop out. Illinois has 9 commits. Their average, again, not great, but they'll probably drop out. Tennessee, Notre Dame, Auburn, LSU, and Florida State. It's really early, but we've talked about this. If he's not able to recruit like a top 10 class, if he's not able to get like up around that number of like 12-ish, I don't know that it's going to work out long term. Like you've retooled your staff to maybe have more recruiters that can get the job done. And I'm not trying to say like it's an indictment if they finish 13th or anything like that. But if you're never able to really turn this thing around and get up to where, to me, if you can recruit in the top 12 consistently, you should be, especially in an easy conference, which we're in, hopefully not too much longer. But if you can't recruit top 12 consistently, which should put you at like 2 or 3 worst case scenario in the ACC, then you're just never going to make it, right? Like that. I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to hold strong here, and whatever progress they show on the field will be a big impact on this too. But if they can't hold around that 11, 12, 13 range and maybe even get better, I think we kind of see the writing on the wall.
I agree with you. And, especially when Jimbo first started, we got used to signing, top 5, top 2, number 1 classes every year he was here. I think his very first year coming off a terrible season in Bobby's last year, they had the number 10 class. So, I do think Florida State fans, for the time being, should adjust their expectations of where we should be. Top 3 should not be an expectation in the world of NIL with what the SEC and the Big Ten have on you right now in terms of financials. But I do think it's not unreasonable to ask for a top 10 or 12 class every single year. There's no reason Florida State should ever finish in the 20s. If you let Ole Miss beat you out for a kid over NIL, that's a problem. I know they have a very strong NIL program. They are in the SEC, but with your recruiting base here, with Miami to Tallahassee to South Georgia being where you're really going to get most of your guys, and then going out and picking off a couple guys nationally, there's no reason you should not be. A bad year should be number 15. A good year should be number 4. A great year should be top 3. But I do think we need to adjust our expectations slightly because going back to the Bobby in the late 80s through the 90s, and then Jimbo from his 2nd to 5th year. Well, even his last year, he had a great class going until he stopped recruiting. Um, we aren't in that time frame anymore. College football evolves, and that is certainly what has happened. But I think top 10 should be an expectation. But you're not going to get upset if you're signing the number 12 or 13 class in an off year. It's like your sales quota this quarter is $100,000, and you hit that 95K. You're not going to get fired for that. You're like, okay, let's just bump that up next quarter, make sure we make up for our losses last quarter. I think that's kind of where at least I'm looking at recruiting with Florida State moving forward, at least in the near or in the immediate future.
Yeah, like in the next 3 or 4 years, it would surprise me if Florida State's ever able to crack that top five, just with their resources, the NIL, just the different things in play. I think Florida State's got a good NIL setup. I think their NIL setup is better than outside of 2 of the 5 years. Their NIL product's been better than their on-field product, and so I think that's going to keep you in battles. But you've got teams and programs that have better NIL than you and are actually winning on the field. And so, I mean, you look for example. I mean, we had the 20th ranked recruiting class, or right around there. Maybe it bumped up to like 19th or something. At Georgia Tech was 21. And there's really no reason that you should be recruiting around Georgia Tech. Now, we've talked about getting a top 20 class with 2 wins is in and of itself a little bit impressive. So yeah, you get the one off, kind of, hey, you under recruited. But I mean, for most of his tenure, Mike Norvell has under recruited, if we're being honest, right? And so they've done a good job in the portal. We've understand the volatility in that after the last 2 years, better than anybody. And so we've always said this. We've always said it starts with recruiting, and hopefully what they're doing in 26 so far is a sign of good things to come. Like I said, if they went out, I don't even really care what they do on field. I mean, I do, certainly. We live and breathe and die this stuff. But no matter what they do on field, right? If it's somewhere, we talked about this before we started. If it's somewhere between 6 and 8 wins, and they can land a top 10-ish class, if they're 12, 13, somewhere in that range, higher than 15 for sure. If they can be in that field, I'll feel like that was progress. And then I think they need to consistently be around that number 10 number, and pushing up higher, over the next few years.
Yeah, and to your point, getting into the top 5, it almost take an act of Congress at this point. Because think about who you're trying to chase down right now. Ohio State, you're not catching them. Georgia, no. Alabama, no. Texas, no. Oregon, no. A&M, probably not, just because they will probably offer double NIL for some players, and that will be enough. So he needs to develop relationships, develop them early, show that last season was a one-off. It's never going to happen again. And as he continues to hire new assistants each year, put a heavy focus on recruiting, because you can't win without good players. I've learned that this season in my college football dynasty, where my roster is just terrible. My fastest receiver is at 87, and I'm averaging like 17 points a game. So get the players and figure everything else out.